Hi, thank you very much. As they said, my name is Dean Carlson. I'm here from Wyebrook Farm. Wyebrook Farm is a 360-acre sustainable farm in Honeybrook, Pennsylvania. We raise grass-fed beef, pastured poultry, and pork out in the woods. So I guess if you'd asked my friends and family 5 years ago, they would have said that I was the least likely person to be here standing in front of you today, especially talking on this topic. I graduated with a degree in economics from the University of Chicago. I immediately went into finance. I worked for 15 years as a bond and derivative trader. I was taught to make quick decisions on complicated financial instruments, often for millions of dollars in seconds. So you can see from that I'm eminently unqualified to talk about anything in farming. But I'm going to try anyway. So one of the things that always really bothered me about economics and in trading is that there was always this need for continuous growth. I never really understood why it was that a person or a corporation or a country couldn't get to a point where they were just wealthy enough and that was good enough. And that bothered me. But it wasn't until I realized the mathematical implications of this continuous growth that it really changed my life and changed the path of my life. And that's what I'm hoping today that I can talk to you about. And so this is an interesting quote that I found. Anyone who believes exponential growth can go on forever in a finite world is either a madman or an economist. So after this talk today, if you still believe this and you're not an economist, well. Professor Albert Bartlett, Professor Emeritus at Colorado State University, has said that the greatest shortcoming of the human race is our inability to understand the exponential function. The exponential function simply describes the size of something that's growing steadily. It'd be impossible to open the newspaper or look on the news without seeing some reference to growth rates. We see it every day. The economy is growing at this rate, crime's increasing at this rate, but we never really understand what exactly that means. We would probably think that it would look something like this, but in fact, when we're talking about growth rates, it looks like this. We accept that human population grows at over 1% each year and will continue to do so. We expect our economy to grow at 3 to 4% a year, and last year, when it grew just under 2%, all we hear is references to the second Great Depression. That's a problem. One other interesting implication that we can talk about. So we talk about growth rates, but we really don't understand what they mean. When you say something grows by X percent, that has very little meaning to most people. So in order to put it into a context that people can understand, it's interesting to look at the amount of time it takes for something to double in size. So to do it actually, you have to use calculus, but there's a really easy way with the rule of 70 that gets very, very close. So if you take 70 divided by the growth rate, that'll tell you the number of years it takes for something to double in size. So in our example earlier, if human population grows at 1%, it'll double in just under 70 years. If the economy grows at 2%, it doubles every 35 years. So even though we're growing slowly, it will still double in size in 35 years. If it grows at 4%, it'll double in 17 and a half years. 7% is an interesting growth rate because that causes something to double in 10 years, and 10 years is a decade, and that's a time period that we're kind of used to understanding. So it's very interesting. Another interesting thing about doubling is that in each doubling period, about how quickly something grows after each doubling period. So after 10 doublings, the size of something is 500 times larger than it was at the beginning. After only 20 doublings, it's over 500,000 times larger. Lastly, in each doubling period, the amount of growth is greater than all of the growth prior to that, which is really interesting. So we accept this growth, and we're just so used to hearing about it that we believe it can continue forever just because it has in the past. But the problem with this is that we live on a planet that has finite resources. We can sit and argue about how much of any one resource there is, but I haven't heard anyone arguing that the size of the earth is increasing. So we're going to have to learn to live within our means. I put up the oil example because oil, up until the 1970s, when the price spiked, was growing at 7% per year. So that means that the amount doubled every 10 years. And you can see that from the graph, and it's picked up again since then. But this is something we're going to have to change. This example is really interesting. There are lots of examples in nature of exponential growth, but there are no examples of exponential growth that goes on infinitely. So if you look at this graph, on the left-hand side of the graph, it looks very similar to the one of human population. What we're trying to achieve is hopefully to not replicate this on the right-hand side of the graph. One other interesting way to highlight the absurdity of our reliance on these exponential growth rates is with human population. If human population were to simply increase by 1.3% every year, then in only 780 years, we would have one person for every square meter, not much larger than the seat that you're sitting in, on the face of the earth. This is something that clearly can't happen, but it just shows you the impossibility of growth rates we take for granted. Dr. Bartlett also gave one interesting example that I saw that describes how time speeds up as you move along the exponential curve. So imagine, if you will, you have a bottle with one bacterium at 11 p.m. That bacteria divides once a minute, and so the population doubles every minute until the bottle would be full at 12 midnight. So I ask you to think about a couple questions. One, at what point would the bottle be half full? And two, at what point would you, as an average bacterium, start to realize that we had a problem here, we were running out of space in the bottle? Well, the answer to the first question is simple. If you work backwards, because it doubles every minute, it would be half full at 11:59. So you have 1 minute left when it's half full. And the answer to the second question is a little bit more subjective. You, as a bacterium, have to decide that on your own. But at 11:55, the bottle is only 3% full and is 97% empty. So I can imagine the leaders of the bacteria colony, the politicians, saying, "We have nothing to worry about here. We have plenty of time to deal with this bottle space issue. It's not a problem. Let's go back to worrying about the NFL referee lockout," right? But they have 5 minutes left. That's all the time they have. So then let's imagine that these ingenious, inventive, entrepreneurial bacteria go searching for new bottles. And let's say they drill in the Arctic and they find a way to hydraulically fracture shale formation, and they find 3 new bottles, which is an amazing discovery. Well, how long would that last them? The truth is, at their current growth rate, it would only last them until 12:02, so they've gained an extra 2 minutes. So that shows you, and in this situation, there is no solution to the problem. The only solution is to stop growing. And that's where we are today. And so my interest in farming comes with this scarcity of resources in mind. I think that we have to find ways to grow food without using more and more fossil fuels. We as humans have a horrible track record of destroying topsoil. For the first time in human history, in the last 20 years, the amount of total arable farmland in the world has started to decrease, with human population increasing and agricultural productivity flattening out. There's only one direction that food prices can go, and that's higher. And the people that know how to grow it are going to become very important again. It's kind of funny because a few years ago I went to Wharton for a talk from a famous investor, Jim Rogers, who was a co-founder of the Quantum Fund with George Soros. And in reference to a question about career advice, he told the group of mostly MBA students that they all should quit school and become farmers. And I'm pretty sure I'm the only person in the audience that took his advice. I can say for sure that I haven't met any MBA students at the 4-H club recently. So I set out basically to try to grow food in a more sustainable way on a personal level. And so the whole idea was to try to find ways to grow food that wasn't reliant on cheap fossil fuels. I really do believe that we've hit peak oil and peak, maybe not peak in all natural resources, but we will at some point. And I believe that we're starting to hit that point with oil. So if we're halfway through oil, that means it's 11:59. We don't have a whole lot of time. And we need to start finding ways to grow food in a more sustainable way. If you look at the way that we grow food in this country, it's incredibly energy intensive. We use 10 calories of fuel for every calorie of food that we produce, which is insane. We're literally eating oil. And if you look, it's estimated that 20 to 25% of our oil consumption goes toward food production, mostly in transportation, which is incredibly inefficient. So the sooner we get started on this, the better. So I set out to find ways to grow food in a more sustainable way, like I said. And so I thought that the first way to grow food in a more sustainable way is to have people buy their food locally and to produce it locally. And so I thought it was very important that people come to the farm to buy their food. And so in that respect, I wanted to find farmland that was close to where people live. We're incredibly blessed in this area in southeastern Pennsylvania that we have very rich soils, we have proximity to huge population centers, and we have efficient transportation networks. I think these are all characteristics of valuable farmland in the future. And then we had to look at ways to raise the animals that was done in a more sustainable way. So sustainable farming simply sets out to grow food in a way that doesn't require increased amounts of natural resources over time. A grass-based system allows us to grow things on a yearly basis without increasing the amounts of inputs. A grass-based system, because it's perennial, doesn't have to be reseeded and tilled every year, which increases the amount of life in the soil. By having the animals graze over the grass, they're always fertilizing the soil, and in fact, you're building soil life over time and soil fertility over time. In a cool way, you're really just harvesting solar energy. Cows and sheep are herbivores, so they can move across the grass, converting solar energy into calories. And that's something that we as humans can't do. We can't digest cellulose, but herbivores can. They have a special stomach called the rumen, which allows them to do it. The biggest way that we save fuel on the farm is by having the animals harvest the food themselves. In conventional modern agriculture, basically we use tractors and diesel fuel to harvest food, bring it in to confined animals in one place. This is something that only makes sense in a world with cheap fossil fuels. It does not make sense in a world where they're dear. So we have the animals harvest the food themselves. Pigs and chickens are a little bit different because they can't live on grass alone like an herbivore can. And so we're constantly trying to find ways to raise them without using grains or with using less grain, basically. Grain is incredibly energy intensive and is highly correlated with the price of oil. And you see that this year. And we've made it even more so by connecting ethanol and oil together, which is incredibly stupid. So one of the ways that I've set out to try to grow food in a sustainable way for animals that need grains is this idea of multi-storied agriculture. And it's something I came across in a book called Tree Crops, which was written back in the 20s or 30s, I think. And the idea is basically that you have multiple stories of agriculture. So on the bottom level, you have grass. Everything sort of is based off of the grass. But then above that, you have bushes and trees. And these can provide food for other animals, like pigs and chickens. And so I've planted hundreds of trees around the farm in an effort to, these take time, but in an effort to have future food sources for these animals. And we've gone about it a couple different ways, planting trees into pasture, but then also taking forested land that wasn't as useful for agricultural purposes and turning that into a savanna-like setting that you see here. So we're thinning it to try to get grass growing on the forest floor, leaving all the mass-producing trees. Anything that could produce food stays in place. And it's something that we've just started, and it's going to be interesting to see how much of a difference it can make. But even if it makes 20-30% difference in our grain bill, that's a huge improvement. I often wonder why it is that everyone doesn't understand the impossibility of exponential growth in a finite world. It just doesn't make sense to me. It seems so obvious. And I guess the only reason is that it's so ingrained in every part of our life that we just accept it and we assume that it can continue. And also the interests that benefit from the status quo certainly don't want us to realize that this is a problem. But what's interesting to know is that you as individuals and we as individuals, every time you make a food choice, it does make a difference to how food will be produced in this country. When you buy your food locally and from a sustainable place, you are voting with that dollar and impacting the way that food will be grown in the future. And we collectively can have an enormous impact on how food's produced. And that's what we all need to think about. And we need to think about ways that each day we can try to start to live in a more sustainable way. I always say that sustainable farming is better in every single way. It produces food that tastes better, it's more nutritious, it's better for animal welfare, it's better for the environment, and it's better for our local communities. Thank you.